For over 80 years, the world's been told one story. A story of a terrible, but necessary choice. That the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were the only way to end the most brutal war in human history. A last resort to save millions of lives. It's a story carved into monuments, a justification repeated in textbooks and documentaries, a story of a difficult but ultimately correct decision. But what if that wasn't the whole truth? What if the deadliest decision of the 20th century wasn't a simple matter of military necessity, but a complex and calculated gamble? For decades, key documents remained classified. Crucial conversations were hidden from the public. These were top-secret files, minutes of secret committees, transcripts of intercepted enemy communications, and the private diaries of the men who held the world's fate in their hands. Now, with these documents declassified, a different story emerges, a story far more complex and far more troubling than the one we've been told. It's a story of political maneuvering, chilling calculations, and a deliberate choice to unleash a power that would change the world forever. This is the untold story of the discussions, the debates, and the deceptions that led to the atomic destruction of two cities. Part 1. The Secret Choice. By the summer of 1945, the world was bleeding. The war in Europe had ended in May with the fall of Nazi Germany, but the Pacific was still a raging inferno. The Empire of Japan, though battered and broken, fought on with a terrifying fanaticism. American forces had clawed their way across the ocean, island by bloody island, in a campaign growing more costly with every mile. The battles of Iwo Jima and Okinawa were dress rehearsals for the ultimate nightmare, a full-scale invasion of Japan codenamed Operation Downfall. The predictions for downfall were apocalyptic. Military planners anticipated casualties that would dwarf D-Day. Estimates, though varied, projected millions of lives lost, American soldiers, Japanese soldiers, and civilians alike. The Japanese government had begun training ordinary citizens, from men and women to children, to fight invaders with bamboo spears, promising a national resistance so ferocious it would bleed America dry. This was the grim scenario facing the new American president, Harry S. Truman. Sworn in just weeks before, following the sudden death of Franklin D. Roosevelt, Truman was an unassuming man thrust into a position of unimaginable power. He now faced a choice no leader had ever confronted. On one hand, conventional warfare, a brutal, grinding invasion that would cost a horrific number of lives but guarantee victory. The American public was weary of war, but the thirst for retribution after Pearl Harbor was strong. Total victory, unconditional surrender was the only acceptable outcome. But there was another path, a secret path. In a report from Secretary of War Henry Stimson, Truman was introduced to the Manhattan Project. It began with a chilling sentence: "Within 4 months we shall in all probability have completed the most terrible weapon ever known in human history." This was the secret choice. He could continue the bloody advance across the Pacific, or he could unleash this new, terrifying power. The official narrative would later claim this choice was straightforward: use the bomb, save lives. But declassified records reveal a far murkier reality. The decision wasn't just about ending the war. It was about what kind of world would emerge from the ashes. It was a choice involving not just military strategy, but geopolitical ambition and a chilling disregard for the line between combatant and civilian. Part 2. The Path to the Bomb. The story of the atomic bomb begins not in the halls of power, but in theoretical physics. In 1939, as the world teetered on the brink of war, a group of scientists, including Albert Einstein, sent a letter to President Franklin D. Roosevelt. They warned that Nazi Germany might be developing a new type of bomb based on nuclear fission, and urged the United States to begin its own research. Roosevelt, understanding the stakes, authorized what would become the most ambitious and secret undertaking of the war, the Manhattan Project. It was an enterprise of almost unimaginable scale. At its peak, the project employed over 130,000 people and cost nearly $2 billion, over $30 billion today. And yet its existence was a closely guarded secret. There was a secret city, Los Alamos, on a remote mesa in the New Mexico desert. There were secret factories in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and Hanford, Washington, vast industrial complexes dedicated to producing the uranium-235 and plutonium that would fuel the bombs. At the heart of this secret world were two profoundly different men. First, General Leslie Groves, a gruff, no-nonsense military engineer. Groves was the ultimate project manager, a man who understood logistics, security, and above all, results. He was tasked with marshalling the immense resources needed to build the bomb, and he did so with ruthless efficiency. His primary concern was delivering the weapon he believed was necessary to win the war. The second was J. Robert Oppenheimer, the brilliant, charismatic, and deeply complex physicist, appointed scientific director of the Los Alamos Laboratory. Oppenheimer was a man of immense intellect who could quote ancient Sanskrit poetry as easily as he could explain quantum mechanics. He assembled a team of the world's most brilliant scientific minds and drove them to solve the immense challenges of weaponizing the atom. For Oppenheimer and his scientists, the project was a thrilling intellectual pursuit, a race against a perceived Nazi threat. But as the weapon moved from theory to reality, a deep sense of foreboding began to creep in. On July 16, 1945, in the New Mexico desert at a site called Trinity, their creation was put to the test. A plutonium device nicknamed the Gadget was hoisted atop a 100-foot steel tower. As the countdown reached zero, the world changed forever. A flash of light brighter than 1,000 suns lit up the pre-dawn sky, followed by a shock wave that rattled windows over 100 miles away. A mushroom cloud, an image that would haunt humanity, rose tens of thousands of feet. The steel tower was vaporized. The desert sand was fused into a green, radioactive glass, later named Trinitite. The power unleashed was biblical. General Groves's first thought was of success. The war's over. The scientists, however, had a more complex reaction. They were awestruck, proud, but also terrified. Oppenheimer, watching the roiling fireball, was reminded of a line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." The Trinity test was a success. The secret weapon was no longer theoretical. It was a proven reality. The path to the bomb was complete. Now, a new, more terrible path was opening, the path to its use. While the fear of a German bomb had spurred the project's creation, by 1945, Germany had surrendered and was no longer a target. All eyes and this new weapon now turned towards Japan. Part 3. The secret deliberations with the Trinity test. A success, the bomb was no longer a question of if, but how and where. This is where the untold story truly begins, in the hushed rooms where a handful of men debated the fate of cities. The official narrative suggests a consensus, but declassified documents paint a picture of deep division, of alternative paths rejected, and of motives that went far beyond just ending the war. The main group for these deliberations was the Interim Committee, a secret high-level body chaired by Secretary of War Henry Stimson. Its purpose was to advise the president on the new weapon. While some Manhattan Project scientists argued for a demonstration of the bomb on an unpopulated area to warn Japan, the Interim Committee quickly dismissed this idea. They feared a failure, a dud, would strengthen Japan's resolve, and worried that the Japanese might move American POWs to the demonstration site. The committee concluded that the only way to make a profound psychological impression was to use the bomb on a city without explicit prior warning. The task of selecting which city fell to the target committee. Their criteria were chillingly pragmatic. The target needed to be an urban area over 3 miles in diameter, with a high population density. It also needed to be relatively untouched by previous conventional bombing, so the full devastating effects of the atomic weapon could be clearly measured. Several cities were on the initial list: Kokura, Hiroshima, Niigata, and Kyoto, Japan's ancient cultural capital. Oppenheimer argued for Kyoto, believing its destruction would have the greatest psychological impact. However, Secretary of War Henry Stimson, who had visited Kyoto in the past, vehemently objected. He argued that destroying a city of such immense cultural importance would be an act of barbarism that would permanently damage America's post-war reputation. After a heated debate, Kyoto was removed from the list and Nagasaki was added in its place. While these committees were deciding where to drop the bomb, another, even more secret drama was unfolding. The United States had cracked Japan's diplomatic codes. Through a program codenamed Magic, American intelligence was intercepting communications between Tokyo and its ambassador in Moscow. These intercepts revealed something explosive. Japan was actively seeking a way out of the war through the then neutral Soviet Union. The intercepts showed that Emperor Hirohito himself had authorized an attempt to negotiate an end to the conflict. The Japanese leadership knew they couldn't win, but they had one crucial condition: preserving the emperor and the imperial institution. They were seeking a conditional surrender, not the unconditional surrender the Allies were demanding. This is the core of the historical argument against the necessity of the bombings. Some historians have argued that Truman and his advisors knew Japan was on the verge of collapse and looking for a way to surrender. The demand for unconditional surrender, issued in the Potsdam Declaration in late July 1945, was a major sticking point. The declaration threatened prompt and utter destruction, but offered no guarantee that the emperor could remain on the throne. It's a point of debate among historians whether a simple clarification on the emperor's status might have secured a surrender without using the atomic bomb. So why wasn't this path taken? Many historians suggest the answer lies in the looming shadow of the Soviet Union. The alliance between the US and the USSR was already fraying. Truman and his Secretary of State, James Burns, were wary of Soviet ambitions. At the Potsdam Conference, Truman mentioned to Stalin that the US had a new weapon of unusual destructive force. Stalin, who already knew about the project through his spies, feigned disinterest. A widely discussed historical interpretation is that a primary motivation for using the bomb was to end the war before the Soviets could join the fight against Japan, as they had promised to do by mid-August, and claim a stake in post-war Asia. The bomb, in this view, was not just the final act of World War II, but also a terrifying demonstration of American power aimed at Moscow. The decision was a complex web of motivations. There was the genuine desire to save American lives by avoiding an invasion. There was the immense momentum of the $2 billion Manhattan Project, needing to justify its existence. And there was the emerging geopolitical chessboard of the Cold War. The idea that the bomb was the only choice is a simplification. The declassified documents show other options were on the table. The choice to use it was just that, a choice. Part 4. The Destruction. The order, issued on July 25, 1945, was stark. It directed the 509th Composite Group to attack Hiroshima, Kokura, Niigata, or Nagasaki as soon as weather permitted. The machinery of death was now in motion. It was simply a matter of a clear sky. On the morning of August 6, 1945, the sky over Hiroshima was clear. It was a Monday in a city of over 320,000 residents that had so far been largely spared the firebombing that had incinerated other Japanese cities. People were starting their day. Children were heading to school. An air raid siren had sounded earlier, but when only a single weather plane was spotted, an all clear was given. No one suspected what was coming. High above, at 31,000 feet, the B-29 bomber, the Enola Gay, flew towards its target. At 8:15 a.m., the bomb bay doors opened, and Little Boy, a uranium bomb, began its 43-second fall. At 8:16 a.m., at an altitude of 1,800 feet, the bomb detonated. What happened next is almost beyond comprehension. First, the light. Survivors describe it as a pika, a brilliant, silent flash. Then, an immense wave of heat, reaching thousands of degrees, incinerated everything and everyone in its path, burning people into black shadows on walls. Then came the blast wave, an unstoppable wall of pressure moving faster than sound. It shattered buildings, tossing cars, trains, and people like toys. Within a mile, 90% of the city was flattened. The blast was followed by a reverse shockwave, sucking debris and bodies back toward the center. Then came the fires, which merged into a massive firestorm, a whirlwind of flame that consumed what little was left. For those on the ground, it was hell on earth. Survivors, their skin burned and peeling off in sheets, wandered aimlessly through the ruins. They were described as a procession of ghosts, holding their arms out to prevent the raw flesh from sticking to their sides. Black rain, a sticky, radioactive mixture of ash and bomb residue, began to fall, poisoning those who drank it to quench their thirst. Toshiko Tanaka, then 6 years old, was thrown to the ground with horrific burns. She witnessed scenes of unimaginable suffering. Sunao Tsuboi, a 20-year-old student, was blown 30 feet by the blast. He saw people with their eyeballs hanging out, their intestines spilling onto the ground. These were the hibakusha, the explosion-affected people. That day, thousands were killed instantly. Though both Hiroshima and Nagasaki had a military presence, the vast majority of the dead were civilians. News from Hiroshima was slow to reach Tokyo. In Washington, there was an expectation of a swift surrender. When it didn't come, the clock started ticking on the second bomb. The primary target for August 9th was Kokura. But when the bomber Boxcar arrived, the city was obscured by haze. With fuel running low, the crew made a last-minute decision to divert to their secondary target, Nagasaki. At 11:02 a.m., Fat Man, a more powerful plutonium bomb, was dropped over the Urakami Valley, missing its intended target by about 1.5 miles. The result was another apocalypse. Sachiko Matsuo, an 11-year-old girl, survived, but her father later died from radiation sickness, his hair falling out and dark spots forming on his skin. By the end of 1945, the bombing had killed an estimated 140,000 people in Hiroshima and a further 74,000 in Nagasaki. The twin atomic attacks had delivered the prompt and utter destruction promised at Potsdam. For the Japanese leadership, the shock was total. The debate was no longer about how to win, but how to survive. The use of a second bomb, combined with the Soviet Union's declaration of war on Japan the same day, finally broke the stalemate in the Japanese War Council. The unthinkable had happened twice. Part 5. The Aftermath and the Legacy. On August 15, 1945, the people of Japan heard something they had never heard before, the voice of their emperor. In a radio address, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender. Citing the enemy's use of a new and most cruel bomb, he declared that to continue to fight would result in the ultimate collapse and obliteration of the Japanese nation. The war was over. For Allied soldiers, the news brought celebration. The dreaded invasion of Japan wouldn't happen. They were going home. In the United States, a Gallup poll in August 1945 found that 85% of Americans approved of using the bombs. The narrative of a necessary evil took hold immediately, but in the ruins of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, a new horror was beginning. The bombs had killed with heat, blast, and a third invisible killer, radiation. In the weeks that followed, tens of thousands more died from an illness whose effects were horrifying and still not fully understood by the public. They suffered high fevers, hair loss, and uncontrollable bleeding. This was radiation sickness, the final death toll from the two bombs, including those who died from long-term effects, is estimated to be over 210,000 people. For the survivors, the hibakusha, the end of the war wasn't the end of their suffering. They bore physical scars, horrific burn marks called keloids, and deep psychological trauma. They lived with the constant fear of cancer and other radiation-induced illnesses, and they faced a cruel social stigma. Feared as contagious, they were often discriminated against in employment and marriage. Many hid their status as survivors to avoid bringing shame on their families. The bomb hadn't just destroyed their cities, it had poisoned their futures. The legacy of the bombings ushered in the nuclear age and the Cold War arms race. The demonstration of American power spurred the Soviet Union to accelerate its own bomb program, leading to a decades-long standoff that brought the world to the brink of annihilation. The mushroom cloud became a permanent symbol of humanity's capacity for self-destruction. Over the decades, the initial consensus supporting the bombings has fractured. As more documents were declassified, the traditional narrative has been challenged. The debate continues today, often split along generational lines. In the US, older generations are more likely to see the bombings as justified, while younger generations are more critical. Yet, out of this tragedy, a powerful movement for peace was born. The Hibakusha became the world's most powerful advocates for nuclear disarmament. They traveled the globe, sharing their harrowing testimonies to ensure that what happened to them would never happen again. Their message is simple: no one else should ever suffer as they have. The cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki themselves have risen from the ashes as symbols of peace. The skeletal Genbaku Dome in Hiroshima stands as a stark, silent witness. Museums and memorials document the horror not to inspire hatred, but to educate future generations. Every year, on August 6th and 9th, the peace bells ring out, and the world is asked to pause and remember. It is a call to reflect on the choices we face today, in a world that still lives under the shadow of the bomb. The stories of the Hibakusha are a vital part of our shared human history. If this story has moved you, we encourage you to support organizations dedicated to nuclear disarmament and preserving survivor testimonies. Sharing this video helps ensure these stories reach a new generation, keeping the memory alive and reinforcing the urgent need for a world free from nuclear weapons. Subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden corners of history. Revisiting the decision to bomb Hiroshima and Nagasaki isn't about judging the past with the clarity of the present. It's about challenging simple narratives and embracing a more complex, uncomfortable truth. The documents from 1945 don't reveal a single motive. They show a tangle of military necessity, political calculation, scientific ambition, and prejudice. Was the bomb a tragic necessity to avert a costly invasion? Or was it a calculated show of force, an opening move in a new global rivalry? The evidence suggests it was both and more. It was a weapon used to end one war and establish dominance in the next. The untold story is that a path to peace might have been possible without this atomic catastrophe, but that path was not taken. The legacy of that choice is the world we inhabit today, a world where the destroyer of worlds still exists, multiplied thousands of times over. The story of Hiroshima and Nagasaki isn't just history, it's a warning. It is a timeless reminder of the terrifying consequences of human conflict and the profound responsibility that comes with possessing ultimate power. It compels us to remember the dead, to listen to the survivors, and to never forget the moment humanity gained the power to destroy itself.